Hi guys, my name's Ian and I'm the head coach at Tri Club, and today we've got sports physiologist John Feeney with us from Pure Sports Performance. So welcome, John.
Thanks, Ian. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. And this is for our series on sport and mental health. So John, can you just tell me a little bit about who you are and your journey sort of through to now as a sports physiologist?
Okay, so it was quite a long journey, I suppose. I kind of started it about 10 years ago now. I used to work in banking and decided to have a career change. That was for a number of different reasons, but perhaps to alleviate predominantly some stress from my work life. So I went part-time while I was working at the bank and decided to go back to uni part-time. So studied sport and exercise science down in Portsmouth, which is a great university, really, really good.
Yeah.
But because obviously I was doing it part-time, it kind of took me double the normal length of a degree. So it took me 6 years to do that degree. I kind of, at the time, I decided to make the leap, if you like, into going back to uni. I was training for my first marathon. I'd been talked into it by someone. I was training for the first marathon. So like everyone else, I was trying to, I was a bit like a rabbit in the headlights, to be honest. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was trying to read up on so much information. And I started to get really interested about the kind of the training science and what was happening with my body and things like that. And I was no decent runner or anything like that, but I just became quite interested in it. And you know what it's like, there's so much information around, you get bombarded with different sorts of training plans and different advice from friends, family, whatever you read in papers online, etc. So that probably was one of the reasons why I decided to study sport and exercise science, was perhaps more from an interests point of view.
Okay.
I wanted to learn a little bit more about the training side of it for myself. Went back to uni, loved every minute of it. I was totally kind of blown away. It was 20 years since I'd done my A levels, and then I was sitting I was kind of, what was I, 35, I suppose. So was that 20 years since I did my A levels? I'm not sure, but whatever. I was 35 when I went into my first lecture with a load of 20-year-olds, and I'm thinking, okay, what the hell am I doing here? And I remember it actually, my first lecture was physiology.
Okay.
No big surprise there.
Yeah.
But basically, I sat in this lecture hall, and the lecturer could have been talking Japanese, Chinese, totally foreign language to me. I came out of there and I was so kind of disappointed. I thought, have I made the right decision here? I was kind of really doubting myself, and probably for the first 6 months of doing that course, I was really struggling a bit and really thinking, okay, have I made this right kind of call here? I know when I left that lecture, I went straight to Waterstones and brought a GCSE kind of biology book. Right. So I could literally start from scratch, because I hadn't done any science since my GCSEs when I did those in 91, 92.
Yeah.
And I had no science background at all. So it helped, but I would say it probably took me 3 years of that 6-year degree to actually get comfortable with what I was doing.
Yeah. Wow.
But it was great. I met some really good people, had a laugh, and learned so much. Got some really good hands-on experience. And so by the time I got to the end of that 6-year period, I came out with a degree. I thought, what am I going to do now? And I guess, like everyone does, you kind of, when you embark on a journey like that, you think, okay, when I come out the end, I'm going to get this really good job with British Triathlon. I'm going to go to the Olympics. I'm going to work for British Athletics. You know, I'm going to be the best physiologist that there is. And obviously, those rose-tinted spectacles, it didn't work out. So I thought, okay, well, I wasn't able, because I was doing it part-time. I wasn't really able to get quite so much kind of really good experience working with the kit that they had at the university, whereas a lot of the students that were there full time could go in when the labs were empty, for example, after 6 o'clock, and get some really good kind of practical experience.
Yeah.
So I had the knowledge and I understood the physiology and that side of things, but applying that to a laboratory setting, I wasn't quite so good at. So I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do? I really enjoyed it. So I thought I'll go and do my master's. So I rubbed salt in the wound, if you like, and I decided to do my master's.
Brilliant.
I had to do that part-time as well. So I did that closer to home. So I did that at the University of Brighton. And they've always had a kind of a bit of a centre of excellence for endurance. And that's really where my love was, if you like. By the time I came out of my degree, you kind of look at you could look at maybe psychology. Do you specialize in physiology, biomechanics, those sorts of things? So I think it was, by the time I did my degree, it was definitely physiology, and it was definitely endurance physiology. So by the time I went to do my master's, it made sense to specialize in physiology, basically, which is what I did. So I had a really good 2 years at Brighton, and because it was a smaller group of people, you could get a lot more hands-on experience, and that's when I did start to get, a few of the cogs started to click in my head, and I started to put things together that I'd learned in my degree, and began to coach a few people, and decided when I came off and was looking to do my dissertation, so my final project. I looked, in the end, I kind of looked at triathlon because it's an exciting sport. Obviously, you've got the 3 disciplines, but also from a coaching and practical perspective, working with those 3 different types of training loads and then amalgamating those all together. So my final project was looking at something relatively new, so neuromuscular fatigue. So how the brain starts to interfere with exercise over a prolonged period of time. And just to make it a little bit harder, I kind of added a heat to the equation, with a view of looking at what would have been the Tokyo Olympics this year. So how would, say, a 40K bike ride as part of the triathlon, how fatigue affects that in kind of a hot and humid environment. And that's basically what my final project was. A lot more work than I thought it was, and I took on a lot more, but it was good fun. Came out the other side of that, and didn't obviously get this wonderful job for British Triathlon or athletics or whatever. So I decided basically to just focus on a bit of my own coaching, and I did some work for a cycling company, some kind of coaching and performance testing for them, which is really good. But they could only offer a couple of days a week. So I think last year I kind of made the decision, right, I'll just get back to kind of my normal day job, if you like, and then I'll do the sports science and the consultancy side, the coaching side, as, if you like, a hobby job for the time being, and just see what happens. But I've enjoyed the journey so far. It's been good.
Oh, thanks very much, John. That's really interesting. And just out of interest, with obviously the coronavirus and what's going on at the moment, can you tell us, has that impacted on Pure Sports Performance, your coaching business, or, because I know you're doing that part-time, but...
So at the moment, I've got a mix of people, and it's mainly at the moment, not necessarily from a training point of view.
Mm-hmm.
It's more from an event point of view. So obviously, I've got a couple of cyclists that I look after,
mm-hmm.
and their first event would have been in the Alps in end of May, early June.
Okay.
So that first block of events has been cancelled for them.
Yeah.
The next one for them is at the end of August in the
Okay.
same sort of region.
Yeah.
So for them, there's a little bit of uncertainty. For runners, there was a couple of marathon runners that I was looking after, and obviously their events, one at Brighton and one at London, have obviously been postponed until October.
Mm-hmm.
So training has been rescheduled and worked around, if you like, but it hasn't been curtailed too much.
Okay.
So the good thing with the cyclists is they can hook up and do some indoor sessions if they're not able to get outside quite so much. So because they were coming effectively to the first peak of their training, they were doing kind of double sessions on a day. And we made the decision that even before the lockdown became more prescriptive, to scrap that, because it just wasn't suitable.
No.
And it's more a case of, okay, well, how do we kind of train a little bit smarter, and still maintain that kind of training stimulus? But obviously, if they're not having to peak quite so soon, you can kind of extend the kind of base sort of training that they were going to do, and that's effectively what we're doing, just pushing it all back, lowering the intensity a little bit and pushing it back. But at the moment, they're still able to train. One of them has had and has got coronavirus.
Sorry to hear.
Unfortunately, it's kind of he's an older guy, but a really good runner. I say older, he's kind of early mid-50s. And it just kind of went through his house. His wife got it, he got it. There was no escape really. He was going to get it.
Wow.
So he's just coming out the other side of that now. But he's obviously, he won't be training for another couple of weeks really. And it's I guess if anything, it's perhaps trying to be aware that you need to be a little bit more flexible with that training. What does happen if you need to take 2 weeks out? Have you got enough flexibility in your plan to do that? So that's at the moment, the athletes are still there, they're still being coached, but the type of coaching has changed slightly to take that into account.
So working off the back of that, in terms of advice that you would give for people training during the coronavirus or lockdown, or if they do become ill, what would you advise people? So I guess the first part of the question is, in terms of training for those that are healthy, what would you advise people? And then if people get symptoms or become ill, what would you advise people there?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, so if you're healthy, that's great. You want to try and maintain that for as long as possible. It's perhaps having in the back of your mind that the inevitable is likely to happen at some point. So, even if you don't go down with diagnosed COVID-19, you may get some mild version of it, or whatever, a cold or flu or whatever. So, you want to try and stay as fit and as healthy as you can for that a longer period as possible. So there's a couple of restrictions on your training at the moment anyway. So one is trying to kind of maintain your health and keep your immune system as good as possible. And the other flip side of that is the restrictions that the government are placing on us as far as where can we go and for how long we can go, basically. So, if you're working on the basis that most of the events are going to be cancelled, most of your races are being cancelled, things like that, then to be perfectly honest, I would just tend to lower the intensity of those sessions. I've coached people, they're going out for 2-hour bike rides and things like that. And I think that's fine.
Hmm.
The danger is that the government then start to restrict that even further.
Sure.
Not only in distance, I think in Ireland, in the Republic, they're restricted to 2 kilometres from
All
their
right.
house.
Okay.
So
Wow.
if it gets that bad, you've got to be, particularly if you're a cyclist, you've got
Yeah.
to have a very good loop close to your house, or be prepared to be very bored cycling up and down a road.
Yeah. Sure.
So I think, if anything, I would tend to lower the intensity of that training, which
Okay.
means that your immune system doesn't take quite so much of a hit. So,
Yeah.
if you go out for a long run, if you do kind of really hard kind of session and it's kind of over that kind of hour in duration, whether that's on a
Yeah.
bike or running or whatever sport you're doing, it's going to take you a little bit longer to kind of recover from that, get your immune system up and running again, or
Yeah. For sure.
not so dysfunctional. So you
Yeah.
just want to try and mitigate that as much as possible and just help yourself. So if you can do any kind of smart kind of training sessions, you can do a higher intensity session, but try and keep that as compact as possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you do get in a situation where you are becoming, you either suspect that you potentially are feeling a bit rough.
Yeah.
So some early warning signs, if people monitor their resting heart rate. So your resting heart rate may be elevated a little bit a few days out. If you're feeling overly tired, so we all get tired if we do a training session, but if you're feeling, additional fatigue on top
Yeah.
of what you would normally do,
Yeah.
and also I've heard, don't take this for red, but I've heard some anecdotal reports and it's coming out of China and also from Italy, that there's kind of a loss of smell and a loss of taste
Yeah. I've heard
two or
that in the
three
news as
days,
well. Yeah.
yeah, prior to that. So, perhaps ignore that one a little bit, but perhaps definitely the heart rate and feeling uh, overly tired is perhaps an early warning sign that, not saying you're going to get coronavirus, but
Sure.
it's an early warning sign that to knock things back a little bit, and
Yeah.
really kind of get, drop a session, get an extra hour's sleep, just don't do anything, and
Mm.
just see what happens in a couple of days. You're much better to drop a session and it be a false alarm, if you like,
Yeah.
than try and get through that session on sort of like 70% effort and really struggle and then go downhill afterwards.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you then get in a situation where you are feeling pretty rough, and and this applies for any kind of respiratory type illness or flu or anything like that, really,
Mm.
it's just, don't train. I mean, there's no point even going out
Yeah.
and saying, okay, I'm just going to do a walk around the block, or I'm going to do a steady spin on the bike, zone 1 or whatever. Don't bother.
No.
It's you. The likelihood is, if you've got even relatively mild symptoms of COVID-19, you probably won't feel like it anyway.
No.
But I think, you have to let that virus or whatever you've got take its toll. Seek the medical advice as and when you need it.
Yeah.
When you come out the other side, then you definitely need to give it. So once you become asymptomatic and you feel 100% better,
Yeah.
then I would just still give it another couple of days. Let it wash away. Eat well, drink plenty of fluids, recover, get all that sleep.
Yeah.
And then effectively what you're looking to do is almost like, I guess, a reverse taper. So, you might have a week where you just go for some brisk walks, you take in a few hills on the walks, but you don't do any kind of real training, if you like.
Mm.
How do you feel then after the end of that week? Do you feel okay? You're not
Yeah.
overly tired? And then effectively start on a couple of weeks of a reverse taper. So if you work back and say, okay, well, what sort of training load was I at before I started feeling rough.
Yeah.
And then effectively you want to start at kind of, maybe 30% of where you were, 40% of where you were. So knock everything back and then just rebuild from there.
And doing it gradually as well, it's really important, isn't it? To not just rush back into that exercise and get ill again.
Yeah, definitely. Because luckily, touch wood, I haven't had COVID-19, but from what you read, even relatively mild symptoms are still quite heavy flu-like. And if your immune system's taken a bash from that, and obviously it has affected your lungs because it's a respiratory virus, then you're going to struggle a little bit to resume normal business as normal, if you like.
Yeah, of course.
What you don't want to do is try and go in and do business as normal and then end up getting something else a week down the line that you just pick up from Joe Blogs in the local shop or whatever. So it's better, like you say, to rebuild gradually, work on a reverse taper, and just take that little bit extra long, little bit extra time to do that, and you won't regret it. You definitely won't look back in a week and say, "Oh, I should have gone out and done that, 90-mile bike ride or whatever you were going to do." Just take your time and recover.
No, it's really sensible advice and some great top tips there for people. So, out of interest at the moment, how are you using your time that you've got? Because obviously you're working from home and you've got this sports physiology business. How's it all working together?
So Monday to Friday, it's kind of, I haven't gone stir crazy yet, or I don't think I have. So Monday to Friday is not quite so bad because obviously I've still got the structure of my 9-to-5 job or whatever.
Right.
But I think keeping a structure is quite important for me because I do tend to get distracted. I do tend to procrastinate a little bit about things, like everyone, I guess, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So I think maintaining the structure is really important. So as we were talking before we started this, it's kind of, I wanted to do something with the time that I normally commute to work. So hasn't quite gone to plan, but the plan is to do some yoga or some strength and conditioning work or something like that in the mornings, and then to learn Spanish in the evenings. So the Spanish side of it definitely hasn't gone to plan yet, but there we go. I'm banking on another 6 weeks in lockdown, so I've got a little bit of extra time.
Muy bien, right? Muy bien.
Yeah, definitely. So during the week is fine, and it gives me a bit of time to give some feedback to people that I've been coaching. So I finish work at say 4, and then I kind of put my coaching hat on and do a couple of hours coaching in the evenings, if you like, and then that gives me a bit of time to myself. I still like to do a bit of running, and obviously I've got to get out and get my exercise, and it's good for my kind of sanity and mental health as well. And then the weekends tend to be more focused around the coaching and the sports science side of it. So one of my goals is to try and put some more structure into kind of my online social media stuff, which I'm not great at, and I tend to do bouts, sudden spurts of it when I think about it, and then don't do anything for weeks or so. So I want to try and put a bit of structure into what I do and make things kind of informative for people, but also have a kind of a business plan behind that as well, as to say, okay, what if I'm posting this, what do I want to get out of it, basically. So that's kind of, I guess, my goal is to try and keep that structure that I normally have, but also use the additional time that I've got as wisely as possible, I suppose, whilst not
I think they're really
stress
important.
myself out too much about it.
Say that again, sorry.
I don't want to stress myself too much about thinking about it, if you know what I mean. And you get in a kind of self-defeating downward spiral, really. If you're thinking, okay, I need to make most of this time, it's kind of, you think, oh, you start overthinking it, and I don't want to spend too long thinking about it. You go around in circles.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling a lot. So we talked a little bit before this about mental health and prep that you can do. And I know you've mentioned in the Tri Club Coaching online community, it's important to work on some of those mental strategies that you have in races. Why would you say that's important now? And also, what can people do in terms of mental preparation to help them when all this, goes away, or, whatever.
So I mean, so hopefully a lot of people are able to keep training going in some form or another, as they've been doing over recent weeks and months. But it's an ideal opportunity to focus on those areas that we perhaps kind of don't think about quite so much when we're in that kind of normal training routine. So in my case, it's yoga and core stability, which I never do, and I tell people to do it all the time, and I don't listen to my own advice. Whereas for some athletes, it's focusing on other areas where they'll be really good at training. They'll be really good at doing their core work and everything their coach tells them to do. So what can they do over and above that with perhaps some extra time that they got, and looking at some kind of mental kind of toughness sort of training. I'm not a psychologist, but there are some things, and particularly looking back, reflecting on previous performances, reflecting on previous training sessions, training blocks, training cycles, whatever you've done. We've come out of a wet, a cold, and miserable winter. How did that go for you? How did that go for your cohort of athletes? So it works both ways. So as a coach, we have to reflect on how we've interacted with our athletes, and how has that worked, and have we provided what to get the most out of their training. But also, and arguably more important, from an athlete's point of view, what's worked well for them, what didn't work quite so well, and that then has to be fed back to you as a coach, or if they don't have a coach, that kind of goes into, perhaps can inform what they do in their next block of training, or when they train for their next race, if their last race didn't go quite so well. So that's kind of like looking back and reflecting on what's good, what's not good, etc. But there's also kind of looking forward, I guess, is another way to look at it, and say, okay, well, what session do I really struggle with? Do I really struggle with low cadence efforts on my bike? Do I struggle with threshold runs, for example? And what do they really look like when you do a good session? How, can I ask Ian as a coach, or whoever, what are the things that I really need to get out of that session? What do I really need to do to perform that session well? If it's a race, for example, what area of your race is your weakest area? Transition, the swim, whatever it is, the last 10k of the marathon, the first 10k of the marathon, hill reps, whatever you want to do. So where is the weakness, and can you picture that perfect session? However, it doesn't have to be anything. You haven't got to sit cross-legged and deep breathe and anything like that. You can just sit down with a cup of coffee, maybe a notebook or whatever, or make some notes, and just think, okay, 2 or 3 things. What would make that the perfect session? What would make that the perfect race? And when you've got those things there, that's really where that focus needs to go for those kind of next sessions. So, for me, for example, I know I never push myself. If I go and do a half marathon, I know I don't push myself as much as I should do.
Yeah.
So why not? At the end of the
Yeah.
day, what the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to blow up. I'm going to have to walk half of it. There's worse things in the world, isn't there? To be perfectly honest, I don't get paid to run. I'm not an athlete, an elite athlete.
Sure.
So I need to think, well, what is my perfect race? My perfect race is to obviously sustain my race pace 100% throughout that whole race. So what's stopping me from doing that? Where are my weak points? And as soon as you start kind of thinking about it, you start to open up a conversation, whether that's with yourself, your coach, or whoever you're talking to, and it's just trying to switch on some lights, if you like, to those areas of our performance that we don't necessarily we forget about, I suppose. We forget because we immerse ourselves in. Someone said to me the other day, well, I don't know what my race pace is, and it's kind of think, okay, well, that's fine. A lot of people, if you go out, so if you do a run, for example, a half marathon, you might go out, your training sessions will be a threshold run, a long, slow run, and maybe some hill reps or fast reps or whatever you want to do. It's very rare that people will go out and actually run at what they consider to be their race pace. And when you look at some kind of files, people upload training files from it and things like that, and you ask them to do race pace, it's actually quite erratic.
Yeah.
Because if you look at a long run, the kind of cadence, if you like, or the pace for the long run, or the power output for a long ride, is generally fairly consistent because they're used to running at a relatively slow pace for their long runs.
Yeah.
They know what their faster pace is for threshold efforts and things like that. But if you ask them to do kind of in the middle, which is generally where your race pace is, it's quite difficult for them, and they're not quite so economical, at running at that kind of pace. So it tends to be a little bit more erratic. Heart rate tends to be a little bit more erratic. So when they said to me, "Yeah, I don't know, I can't run at my race pace," you kind of think, okay, well that's funny, but it's actually quite true. They found it quite difficult to do. Yeah. So for them, that's an area that needs to be focused on, but they might not have realized that until they started to actually think about where some of the weaknesses in their training is.
Yeah, no, that's really true. It's like you say, it's about the reflection. It's about looking forward. It's about using things like picturing what is your perfect race, your perfect session, and also focusing on your strengths, but also what you can work on with your coach as well. And it's a two-way relationship that you
definitely
have to engage in, and it's important to have that communication there and that feedback on both sides, really. And so that's really helpful, John. I think we're going to leave it there for now. I want to thank you for your support. Pleasure. I want to thank you for contributing. And just as a final sort of, I guess, pitch for your own coaching business and so on, where can people find you on social media, on the internet to access some of your expertise?
Okay, so I have got a website.
Okay.
Which is www.puresportsperformance.co.uk. So that's quite easy to remember.
Yeah.
I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
I'm on all of it, apparently. So I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Yeah.
And people are more than welcome to ask me questions. I love answering questions, to be honest, and I like a good challenge. So if people have got queries, they can either, if they want to come through you and you pass it on to me,
whichever way is fine.
So if people search for, I think my Twitter thing is at Pure Sports Perf.
Right. Okay.
PERF, because you can't get performance in. So not very well thought through, I'm sure. But if you Google Pure Sports Performance, it should come up, and I say people can either whiz a question over or go through you. That's fine.
That sounds like a great idea. So if you want to check out John's stuff, please do. It's www.puresportsperformance.co.uk, and I'm sure you'll be able to find his social media channels that way as well.
They're floating around there somewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. So thanks very much for joining us again, John, and tune in for the next episode, guys. Details will be coming soon. And that's all for now, folks. Thanks very much for joining us.